Thank you all for joining us today. My name is Sarah Lee, and on behalf of Carahsoft Technology Corporation, I would like to welcome you all to our CL Tech webinar for From Noise to Impact, Building Mission-Driven AI in the Agency. With that, I would like to introduce our speaker for today's presentation, Angela Kovach, Head of Public Sector at CL Tech. And Angela, I will pass it over to you.
Thank you, Sarah. Good morning, and thank you for joining me for our webinar today, Building Mission-Driven AI in the Agency. As Sarah said, I am Angela Kovach. I'm an attorney by training and head of public sector at ZL Technologies. For over a decade, I've worked alongside federal agencies at the intersection of evidence, human-generated data, and operational workflows. In that space, we evaluate all solutions with a simple framework. Everything must be defensible, auditable, and mission aligned. And I think that really makes me uniquely qualified to discuss today's topic with you. I'm coming to AI from the mission and evidence side, not the model side, which is really why I focus on what government can trust and operationalize. So with that, let's talk about our agenda and what we're going to cover for the day, and then we'll get started. So there have obviously been a lot of conferences, webinars, and chatter about AI recently, but I think today we're going to approach things from what I believe is a unique angle. So we're going to talk about some of the very real ways to enable government to continue its AI evolution and move beyond where I think we are today, which is a lot of limited pilots, experimental AI, and chatbots into something with deep mission-driven impact. So we'll start out talking a little bit about why many initiatives fail, and that is not because of a failure in the AI technology itself, but because some critical foundational pieces are missing. So really the bulk of our time will be spent exploring how to correct those issues and deliver impactful and successful initiatives. So we'll talk a little bit about developing a high impact use case before exploring or adopting AI, which seems intuitive, but is often not the starting place. We'll talk about the data foundation that supports trustworthy AI, and that includes data governance as the roadmap to accountability and innovation. And then we're going to talk about some adoption strategies that ensure that AI becomes an integral and lasting part of mission delivery. The key message for today overall is that government AI can succeed when it has a clear mission focus, is built on agency specific, clean, governed data, and has buy-in from the people who use it. And that's how we're going to move from noise into mission-driven impact. Okay, so let's move on. So let's start. All right, so we're going to kick off the day with a little bit of a sobering statistic, especially in light of how strongly focused I think our professional conversations and personal conversations have become around AI. A recent MIT study showed that 95% of AI projects fail before they really even get started. And I just want to pause to really absorb that because in any other industry, that would not be a learning curve. And that's the way that a lot of us are messaging it today. We're just learning. But if you think about it, that would be a shutdown situation and most other situations. So imagine if 95% of 911 calls failed to dispatch help. You wouldn't iterate that system, you would replace it. Or if your weapons or intelligence system only worked 5% of the time, that would be classified as a liability, not a capability. So why are we seeing this? And I think, recent news this morning even said we're seeing this explosion in AI, but a collapse in confidence. What's the problem? And that's because we have disconnected pilots with no alignment to enterprise or larger mission goals. This is my personal theorization. Agencies are often prioritizing, I think, tools instead of the outcome, and sometimes we lack the governance structures that ensure accountability and ROI visibility. So really what it is AI fails without purpose and governance. So let's talk a little bit about the bubble. Just because we're seeing that things are failing doesn't mean they're not starting. And I think that's the definition of a bubble. You see a lot of activity, but at a certain point, because there's no longevity, things pop. So let's talk about the things that are starting. So, federal AI adoption has accelerated faster than almost any other area of technology in the history of the government. According to the Office of Management and Budget's 2024 AI inventory, agencies reported more than 1,700 use cases. That's up from about 750 in 2023, which is more than double in a single year. Can you imagine any other technology where you've seen that kind of growth recently? The Government Accountability Office also reported a ninefold increase in generative AI use cases in 1 year. And that growth spans every mission area: human resources, cybersecurity, healthcare and benefits, citizen services. But I think what we all have to stop to acknowledge is with that growth comes risk. That same 2024 OMB inventory found that 227 of those use cases are rights or safety impacting, meaning that errors or bias in these AI use cases directly affect US citizens. We are servants of the US citizens at the end of the day, and the things that we choose to do could directly impact them. So pilots are impacting people. And that's important to think about because right now, the other thing we should acknowledge is there is no federal statute enacted by Congress to regulate AI across sectors, which is in contrast to the EU, which passed the AI Act. So, what are we relying on? What are we using to regulate ourselves right now? Agency self assessments, voluntary guidelines, other existing regulatory frameworks that we use to try to understand the problem. And it's a unique problem, so those things often don't translate. There are some beacons of hope. We are moving in the right directions in some ways. So one of the clearest areas where there was a direct authoritative response for the executive branch came from the OMB. So OMB memo M2410 of March of 2024 says agencies have to apply risk management and governance controls to any high impact AI system and pause deployments that fail to comply. But the issue is, how do we measure high impact? We don't necessarily have a uniform standard. What does compliance look like if we don't have a framework? So we have some questions here. So I think the takeaway is if we rush to do AI without proper governance, then we're multiplying the surface area for data errors, bias, and compliance breakdowns. Expansion without oversight increases exposure. And so that's where we see things fail. If we look at a lot of these pilots, these 1,700 pilots in 2024, my question is, where are things in 2026? How many of these are still actively going? So let's move to the next slide. Why are some of the reasons that we are seeing this growth, but not necessarily the success stories keeping pace? I know that I attend a lot of conferences and I'm excited to hear stories about how agencies are adopting AI. I hear a lot about we're trying AI. What I'm not hearing as much of, especially when we think about 1,700 use cases, is the amazing impact and everything that's changing as a result. So what is that about? Why do we think that could be the case? And this is just sort of theorizing, right? Many projects can begin in isolation. So we're excited about a new tool, or we have a pressure to deliver AI results fast. USAI.gov is out there. Let's use it. So that's where it starts. Not we have a need, we have a use case, there's something that's driving us that we want to try to do. Let's go look to AI for that. It's let's try AI and figure out how we use it next. And then we may or may not engage the CIO or the CDO. So we're very often not even considering records management or data governance teams. Legal may or may not be involved. And if they are, it's probably not from a holistic risk assessment and ethical standpoint. And often the solution works just well enough for that limited use case, but it's not something that will scale to an enterprise level. And that's because the model data and the governance don't translate and there isn't a strong use case. So I would say that's really tough, especially when we're in an age where people are pushing for a new federal landscape where we connect the pipes and consolidate component and agency workloads. So I would argue that we are at a tipping point in the AI conversation today. It can't stay focused on the tools or pilots anymore. In order to make it sustainable and mission driven, we need to start thinking about how to build from the ground up, starting with use cases and data, and then moving into the tools. Let's round this area out. So we'll move to the next one quickly. So just a couple more statistics, and then I think we're going to move into the hopeful part of the presentation. So one of the big areas where we're seeing a gap, particularly in the government, is AI governance. There was a recent study conducted, and it showed industry experts feel that government is a generation behind. And imagine what kinds of mission and sensitive data we're dealing with. So this is important to think about. Um, 90% of surveyed agencies lack centralized AI governance. They are handling citizen data, classified information, and critical infrastructure, but don't have the governance controls around the AI use cases that we are seeing an explosion in. One third have no dedicated AI data controls, not anything. So that does not mean that they are trying, it just means we're punting it. And 71% of government advisory boards are not engaged in AI governance. So they're not thinking about the governance aspect of AI. So this is an important gap. And I think this is again, when we look in the future to say, why did these things not succeed in the way that we'd hoped? This would be a place that you might want to start. All right. But let's move away from those critical pieces of thinking of the morning, and let's start looking at some tangible ways that we can turn this around. So let's think about developing high impact use cases. And there's a quote I love. So we'll go to this quote really quickly. As you grow, it comes down to ruthless prioritization. You have to say no to 10 really good things to do two great things. So I really want to talk about not only identifying quality use cases as the start of your AI use journey, but also prioritizing from those quality use cases the best ones to begin with. So let's move into use case identification. Okay. So I would argue, the fastest way to stall an AI initiative is to start with the technology instead of the mission. If you are looking and saying, I like the idea of agentic AI, or I think it would be fun to use generative AI, but you don't know what you're using it for, and you procure this or you start using this, it's not likely to have the impact that you desire. And there are a number of reasons for that, and we'll talk about them. But this is an easy thing to overcome. So I think the place that you want to start instead is you want to define a challenge or an opportunity for the AI within your agency. So start with a real operational problem. Something that is slow, something that is manual, error prone, resource intensive. Is there a group of people doing the same thing 4 hours a week, every week, and it's something that could be handled by technology instead? If success would not change how the mission operates, though, it's not the right use case. That's not where you want to begin, because really what you're trying to do is develop a use case that would lead the agency to saying, look how great this technology is, not like, oh, that was a minor solve, great job. So the next step after you identify the challenge or the opportunity would be to think about who is actually impacted. Who lives with this program every single day? Who are the people who are the program owners? Who are the analysts, the operators? Who is the leadership in charge of the people doing the work? These are all of the stakeholders who need to be involved to validate whether the AI will be helpful or if it's just going to be adding noise to an already noisy technology landscape. You need to bring all of those people to the table when you start exploring whether this is something that you want to try out. Then you need to be explicit about the outcome. The outcome cannot be, let's use AI, but you want to think about instead, what can AI improve? We want to come and get faster decisions. We're hoping to have fewer errors in this report. We're trying to reduce a massive FOIA backlog. We need better insights into our procurement pipeline. We need reclaimed staff time from writing these labor-intensive reports. If you are not able to clearly articulate the outcome that you desire, you are not going to be able to measure the success of the AI or defined return on investment metrics. It is that simple. If you can't clarify, if you are not able to articulate it today, you will not be able to articulate it tomorrow. The next thing that you need to do is look at the systems that are already in play. Nothing is happening in a vacuum. AI does not operate in a vacuum. There are existing tools, data sources, and workflows that this solution is going to have to plug into. And that is the friction where a lot of pilots fail because we didn't stop to think about all of the impacted technology tools, workflows when we start to implement these tools. So you really need to, in addition to pulling those stakeholders to the table, map that out so that you're able to discuss that. And then you need to understand the data reality. And we're going to talk a lot more about data in a moment. Right now, that might not feel as necessary because of the sum of the pilots that we're doing, and we'll talk about it. But at some point, it's going to be important to understand the data. What data would be needed to train or inform the model, where it lives today, and who owns it. And that ownership matters because if the data can't be accessed, it can't be governed, it can't be trusted, this use case that you've identified will fail before it starts. It's never going to scale. And the reality here, and the takeaway from this, is that strong AI use cases aren't discovered. You don't find them out after you start using AI. They are designed, they are deliberate, they are designed around mission outcome and real constraints that you have to qualify and plan for before you get started. Okay. All right. So we have identified some use cases. I'm sure that if you sat and thought about it, you probably, using that framework I just provided, could list out 5 or 10 that you could imagine would be useful at your agency. That is the first step. The second step then is to prioritize, like our quote at the beginning of this section. So once you've identified some use cases, I find that this matrix can be a really helpful filter for helping you to determine what to prioritize first. So let's start kind of at the left-hand corner. So this is the invest corner. So if you think about this, if we talk about something that's high impact, high effort, big bet, these are enterprise level transformations. They are going to cross programs. They require shared data and they demand leadership sponsorship. That's that sort of high effort. But they can be worth it because they would fundamentally change how the mission operates. You would think about things that fall into this corner as long-term investments. They're not pilots because they're going to take a lot of time to plan. There are a lot of stakeholders to bring to the table. There are probably a lot of impacted workflows and tools, but the outcome of it would be so great that it is worth the investment. So there are things that should go into that bucket. If we move over to the right, focus. This is your number one priorities. These are the ones that go to the top of the list. These are high impact, low effort, quick wins. So if we're talking about a pilot, if we're talking about trying AI, this is where you want to go. Tightly scoped problems that have clear ownership and contained risk. So the impact will be real to the agency, but the blast radius is limited because the use case is narrow, the data is well understood, or it's an advisory decision. So maybe think about there's an internal report that takes hours of staff time every week and utilizes readily available data, but it is just draining resource time away from real mission work. That could be a really nice focus project. And then at the bottom, we kind of get to our like, all right, avoid. Avoid. It requires a bunch of coordination. There's a bunch of stakeholders, there's a bunch of changes we'll need to make, but nothing is materially going to change. It is a distraction. And we've done the hard work of identifying the use cases first, so we're able to filter this garbage out instead of having to figure this out later down the line, right? Let's avoid these things, push them down. And then there's a defer category over to the right. So that's everything else. Anything that didn't fit in those other three buckets, it's interesting. It may not require that much work, but it's not worth prioritizing when you think about all of the other high impact projects and other resource constraints that persist at your agency. Put those in the bucket and think about them later as you get done with the ones that are in the focus and invest columns. Okay. All right, we're throwing a lot of information at you. I'm going to move to something a little bit different. And I feel like when you start talking about data, a lot of people's eyes roll. But at the end of this presentation, I'm going to talk about why it's important, even if this is not in your current scope of responsibilities, to think about data. So we've got our use case, we've done some prioritization, But this is something that has widely been acknowledged. If you listen to the chatter on at conferences, in articles, this is a gap in most AI use cases today, the data. Right. So let's talk about data. Do you want real AI? Start with the data. That's the title, right? Most AI models in use today, if you don't know this already, and some of you do, are generalized large language models trained on public internet data. So they are trained on Wikipedia, social media, whatever exists out there in the internet ether. Why is that the case? And that means it's at every agency. A lot of agencies are using, if you think about USAI.gov, if we talk about the new DOW's deployment of generative AI, it's a Google model. These are all generalized models. Why are we using these models? They're faster to deploy for pilots and proofs of concept. But what we're trying to talk about today is how to move past that, how to build something lasting. And so that's why I'm going to talk about an alternative. These work in certain capacities. There are lower upfront costs and hurdles when you're working with a generalized LLM. They work well enough again, but that's not necessarily enough for lasting long-term use. And that's because these models are powerful at pattern recognition, but they have context blindness. They don't have a real understanding of an agency's unique mission, your culture, your decision context, and there is a ceiling on accuracy. I think we have all experienced, or I feel at least personally, a degradation in the quality of the responses I've been getting from ChatGPT recently. Um, Things, after a while, the model can degrade in quality. And that's because they can generate fluent answers, but they're not necessarily accurate or meaningful because they're sort of trained on the boundaries of the data. So, what am I suggesting instead? So I would suggest, and this is, we're talking in the capacity of generative models, but this is also applicable if we think about agentic AI. But we should be looking at agency data. So for generative, we could talk about training SLMs, small language models on agency data. They would be energy efficient if you care about that, lower compute, lower cost in the long run. They are more precise. They are context aware with fewer hallucinations, and they are more operationally reliable because they're easier to tune, test, and sustain. You have control over them. But the question mark here for probably a lot of us, if we think about, okay, it's so great, it would be so much more accurate, why are we not doing it today? And that's because there is a reality we all have to deal with. Agencies, and also in the commercial world, this is the case, we're dealing with fragmented data environments. Records are spread across systems, formats, sensitivity, classifications. It makes it difficult, it feels difficult to find and gather the model we want gather the data we want for training. And I think this is where something interesting happens. There's a list that we've seen circulating about professions that are at high risk for becoming obsolete because of AI. And listed on there is records management. And for me, I think we should rethink that because I would propose we bring our data governance and records management professionals to the front lines of the AI task force. Because if we recognize SLMs are a better solution, we need help locating the data and connecting the pipes. And we need help with the governance because if we don't have the governance, the data becomes a liability instead of an asset. Something else I want to talk about here. AI learns directly from the data it was trained on and from the way humans categorized and described that data. I think this is something that a lot of us don't have a full understanding of. This is true of even the LLMs that we're using, even of ChatGPT, of Google's model. There is a human somewhere reviewing data sets and performing something called reinforcement learning from human feedback, RLHF. Somebody is sitting somewhere and deciding what constitutes an accurate or correct answer. Who are these people in these LLMs? Do you know them? Do they know your agency or mission focus? So imagine they're making that decision. If you had an SLM, it changes to the people in your agency making those decisions. And you also have to think about the fact that if the underlying information, that information from the internet or the information from your agency is disorganized, untagged, or incomplete, The model is just going to reproduce those flaws. It does not fix the flaws, it reproduces them. But if you have properly governed, annotated, categorized data, the model will produce outputs that are accurate, explainable, and trustworthy. It's a big thing. I'm going to wrap us up here. A couple more things, though, before we end on this slide. Another big blocker to this SLM idea is that agencies and companies are afraid of the cost and the risk of disruption of unfederating data from its secure silos and moving it into massive lakehouses. They don't want to do it. It duplicates storage, it creates security exposure, and it can drive costs way up. So I am proposing here, and this is something that we can do, but it is also just a solution I would propose no matter what, in place. So in place data management removes the barrier by training and running models where the data already lives. It sits where it sits, and you're able to govern it, categorize it, tag it where it sits, minimizing movement, preserving security boundaries, and reducing those costs. So let's push aside that roadblock. And I think finally here, I would just say this is why it's important to connect your chief data officer and your CIO, your chief AI officer, for these conversations, because the chief data officer ensures the data is curated and compliant. The CIO ensures that the AI uses that data responsibly and aligns to mission priorities. When they work together, we move beyond experimentation towards measurable outcomes. All right, let's keep going. All right. Governance. It's another area where we don't think about a lot, feels back office sometimes, but governance is not a roadblock. It is the roadmap to AI that is lasting and effective at an agency for a lot of the reasons we just discussed and more that we're going to talk about now. So, access controls such as zero trust and role-based permissions keep sensitive data protected, while metadata standards ensure that the models understand the context of the information they're learning from. So if you have a combination of security and clarity, it transforms the AI from a research experiment into an operational asset, and you don't have to be as concerned about the output of the model. Governance also connects the stakeholders who make AI sustainable, like we just talked about. You should be connecting the CDO, every agency is mandated to have one, Chief Data Officer, the CIO, the CISO, the CIO, legal, and records leaders. Everyone holds a piece of the framework for successful AI. When they collaborate under a shared governance model, when everyone's considerations are taken into concern, because they have different considerations. Legal is thinking about something differently than the CIO and cybersecurity, than records leaders. When they collaborate, the innovation becomes safe and faster because the trust and accountability are already built in. Do the work up front, and then things run a lot smoother down the pipe. Because the reality, again, is that LLMs do not govern data. The generative AI models we use are not going to govern the data. They only learn from what they're fed. If the data is wrong, it's incomplete, or it's biased, the model will reproduce those flaws at scale. That solution is not to control the output, but to govern and curate the input. Governance is not a barrier, it is the roadmap that turns curated, agency specific data into trusted, mission driven AI. Okay. So let's move on to unstructured data. So we've been talking a lot about data, the data foundation, data governance, but when I'm talking about these things, what I'm really talking about is unstructured data. And I don't expect you to be familiar with this if you're not somebody like me that's a geek thinking about data all of the time. But I think as soon as I tell you what it is, it will click. Unstructured data is human generated data. It is the emails, PDFs, chat logs, memos, images, case files. It is roughly 80% of all agency information. It is where the real story of the mission is written. It is also the data that is most often ignored or left unmanaged. Most tools, when we talk about some of these big players out there, Databricks, Snowflakes, they focus on structured data, databases, spreadsheets. And that's because that information is easy to triangulate. You know where core fielded data lives. If you think about unstructured, by nature, it's very difficult to identify where stuff lands. And so there are companies that specialize in that, ZL. If you're only focusing on structured data, you get metrics, but you don't get meaning. And so that stands in a stark contrast, and this is another reason we are not using SLMs, to what generative AI needs. They thrive on language and context, which means unstructured data is where the most valuable insights are hiding. So if you are only working with tools that look at structured data, you are missing the whole picture. If you start to try to think about getting a tool in your agency to look at agency data, maybe you're working in geospatial intelligence, you're getting geolocation data without the analyst's notes, you miss the context. So you miss the whole picture. But the problem is, unstructured data can contain tremendous risk as well. So if you think about it, this is human generated data where real conversations are happening. And so it's very important if you do start to consider getting a tool that deals with your unstructured data to ensure that that tool doesn't just give you access to that data, but it enables controls, classification, governance. Otherwise, you could open up a Pandora's box of security and compliance problems. So you have to solve both problems at the same time. Look for something that deals with your unstructured data to get all of that valuable context, but make sure it's helping you govern and control it. That's the secret to great AI as a complementary solution. So I have a couple of examples I think that are kind of fun. So not everything is doom and gloom. There are some agencies and companies that have had some success, some early success, because we still are early in our journey. When some agencies have harnessed their unstructured information, they've uncovered patterns and relationships that have revealed information that other models, publicly trained models, could never have revealed. So an example, the US Department of State used AI to analyze their unstructured procurement data. So, all of that information that goes into the context of a procurement. And the system automatically classified thousands of these free text requisition descriptions, and it revealed trends in spending, potential compliance risks, things that were invisible in the structured systems that were just looking at structured databases and would not have been possible to see if you used a general purpose model. The U.S. Department of Agriculture used document processing to extract data from thousands of PDFs, and that result was a clearer understanding of program efficiency and workforce utilization that the manual review of those documents could never have delivered because it's just such a massive scale, right? So these use cases show the power of using unstructured agency specific data to help improve decision making and operational insight. Generalized large language models trained on internet data cannot understand an agency's acronyms, cultures, or workflows. And that's just something to remember. So, takeaway here before we move on, unstructured data holds the knowledge that defines how your agency operates. When it is governed, it becomes the foundation for AI that reflects your mission. When it is ungoverned, it becomes a big ball of risk. Okay, let's keep going. We're going to wrap up on data here quickly, just with a little bit last sort of takeaway thoughts. Um, as in life, diversity is a make or break. So 38% of respondents cite diverse data as the leading cause of success. When you have unstructured and structured data and unstructured data from a variety of agency-specific sources, you get more accurate predictions, richer insights. You have the context of the numbers that is important, and it understands your culture. When you don't have your own data or you have not managed data well, then people are seeing 33% of respondents say their projects have failed due to challenges in managing this data. I would posit that this is also because they didn't bring those records managers or the CDO or the people who understand the data to the table when they started to think about AI. So once again, this is my pound on the table pitch to just like get those people involved, make sure you have them as part of your stakeholder conversation. All right, we're gonna get to the end here. I think we have a question. I'm gonna move the last part of the presentation. We're gonna talk a little bit about locking in long-term adoption. But before I do, I think, Sarah, we have a question here. All right. So, if we thought about our long-term AI roadmap, now we have gone through identifying and prioritizing mission essential use cases. We've thought about how we can get the pertinent information to make sure that those models are learning from our agency-specific context and culture. And I think the final puzzle piece to make sure that our AI is long-lasting is thinking about locking in long-term adoption. So, if we move on to thinking about deploying AI for enduring impact, starting small and planning big. So, even if you're thinking about a small use case pilot, it's important to think about how it could scale to an agency wide, or even if you want to start a little smaller, a component wide initiative. Is this something that could have a greater scale than its initial deployment purpose? And I think that that is going to help you pick use cases when you're prioritizing as well that have potential lasting power. And it's the same thing, build once, reuse often. So if you are thinking about something that is usable in other contexts, it means then you are also getting some efficiency gains and some cost savings, and it may be easier to get the funding that you need if you're able to say, hey, I know we're deploying this AI for this particular purpose, but I think we're going to be able to use it here, or it could scale here, or we're going to be able to do something with it again. It's the concept of it doesn't need to be a unitasker. I would argue almost every technology that we use today should not just be used for one thing. If you are baking in that governance later, baking in that governance early, that also means that you're not going to have it unravel later down the line when you start identifying security issues, when something comes up around some kind of access controls that was a problem that you hadn't anticipated, when the output seems to become problematic. You've thought about all of that in advance. And I think that again, this is a personal opinion. I'm concerned that we may see some of these things happen as a ripple impact of the AI that we're deploying today, because we haven't thought about that initially in some of these AI pilots. And then you also want to think about designing for growth, making sure that again, you've baked in all of the controls, you've thought about the data, you've done all of the training, and you have a solution that's scalable, something that can scale if it is reused again or reused for a larger agency purpose. Those sort of four areas will help you make sure that you're choosing AI that can have an enduring impact beyond the initial use case for which it was selected. Okay. And then let's go on. Driving durable AI adoption. And I think this is an overlooked piece of the whole AI implementation puzzle. The people. If people don't want to use it, and if the vendors don't stay engaged, it will not be successful. And I think the first part is one that, as a vendor, I'm going to hammer on. When you are selecting a vendor or you are talking to a vendor, you should make sure from the beginning that they are prepared to stay with you on this journey. Your vendor should be with you beyond the implementation of the technology. They make a sale, the technology comes into your agency and they disappear, that's a problem. They should be continuing to be engaged, or they should have a partner that can continue to engage with you to train the system, to monitor the system, to make sure that there are updates after deployment, to take your feedback on the way that the system is working, and to continue to improve and partner with you on this system. I think that this is absolutely essential, and I think that this has sometimes been lacking. I think people make or break adoption. And this is you, the people who are listening at an agency. If you don't use it, if you don't trust it, if it feels like it's a headache and another thing that you have to deal with in the day instead of a time saver, it will go away. I don't know how many times, and I've worked in and around the government for a long time, a really great looking solution comes out, but nobody feels the need to use it. Why? Because we didn't start with a use case. So, yes, it's cool technology, but do I have a need every day that is driving me to use that technology? No, it's going to go away. So, we need to make sure that the end user trusts it, is invested in using it. And I think that starts a lot with that use case prioritization we did earlier. And then the training must be continuous. You need to have structured programs, not just a one-time orientation where people are constantly learning about the technology, about the workflow behind the technology, about the pieces of information that feed the technology. This is going to have to keep going on. It can't be something that we just, deploy and go. I think it's absolutely essential for enterprise long-lasting AI. And I will wrap us with one quote and thought for the day. So, learning how to learn will be this generation's most needed skill. I feel like if you just take that at face value, it doesn't seem like a lot, but I am going to argue that in this generation and in this AI age, being elastic in what you learn and what you're interested in is going to be absolutely essential to your professional and personal success. Things that would not initially not have been in your scope before, maybe you didn't consider them in your mission work, you're going to have to learn about, and it's going to be important for you to be able to continue to succeed. You probably, a lot of you never thought about data before. You have to think about data now. You might not have thought about a lot of technology. Now you're going to have to think about technology and learn about the difference about of things like SLMs and LLMs. It's critical to be successful in this new age. And I don't think that that's a bad thing. I think it's good. It keeps us young. So I would again just emphasize learning how to learn is your most needed skill right now. But we're all adaptable. And I think that we should all take away from this. We can all continue to be relevant if we continue to learn. Um, and thank you. I'll just wrap there. And I know we maybe have some questions, but I appreciate everybody spending some time with me today. I know it's hard to listen and see slides for 50 minutes straight, but I think that these are important things to learn about. And I really appreciate you taking the time to hear it from me. Please reach out to me if you have questions, if you want to learn more, if you just want to connect. I'm always open to any type of conversation.
Thank you so much, Angela. We can go ahead and jump into questions and answers now. If you do have a question, please go ahead and drop it in the Q&A pod on the bottom of your screen on the toolbar. But we can go ahead and get started. Angela, the first question is, do you have AI courses on prompt engineering or any other to learn basics of AI?
I don't, but there are a lot of great courses out there if you look for them. I'm actually taking a course at MIT on AI for executives. I think you can find courses like that. That's not something that ZL offers, but they're readily available, and I would certainly recommend them.
Thank you.
I would say again here, just I guess pausing to think about the fact that we're concerned about prompt engineering. Prompt engineering will always be important, but prompt engineering becomes less critical if the data used to train the model is context aware and targeted. Because what we're doing with prompt engineering is trying to root out the relevant information from a really large data pile. And so I think, and to help it learn context. And I think when you have agency specific data, that becomes a little bit easier. So that's where I'll make that plug again.
Awesome. Can go on to the next question. You emphasize centralization and connecting the pipes between agency data repositories. Does that mean agencies need to lift and shift all their data into a single repository?
No, that's where I talked a little bit, and I know there's a lot of information about in-place data management. There are solutions, ZL is one, that are able to manage the data where it sits. And so they are actually able to extract out the intelligence of the data from the location in which it lives without putting it in a centralized lake house and unfederating it. And I think that's worth a conversation, but that does exist. There are a lot of solutions that will tell you you have to lake house it. You don't. Um, ZL, for example, will plug into Teams, SharePoint, Outlook, and create a virtual index of the unstructured information from those locations without duplicating it or lake housing it. So there are solutions that can do that.
Awesome. We have just a few more minutes, guys, so if you do have questions, please go ahead and drop those. One more question, Angela. How do you see agentic AI use cases shaping federal operations over the next few years?
I think we're in the same place that we've been with the generative AI conversation. Everyone is clamoring because agentic AI is new and it feels like the next generation of AI. But I would start with the same thing I've been saying this whole presentation. We don't know until you define a use case. Why do you want the agentic AI? What will it solve for? Agentic AI helps go out and it can make its own decisions. It can simplify workflows that are very manual. There's a lot of benefits of agentic AI, but I don't think it's beneficial until you understand what you want it to solve for. So I would say um, that question depends on what your agency needs. If there is a large need and an agentic AI can solve for it, it could be transformative. Some agencies, maybe less so.
Awesome. I'm not seeing any other questions right now. The Angela's contact information is here on the screen. So if you do have a question that we didn't get to today or something that comes up afterwards, please don't hesitate to reach out. We're all here for you guys to provide more information. Um, but I think we can go ahead and wrap up if that is all of the questions for now. Thank you so much, Angela, for being with us this morning. And thank you to all of the participants who joined us today. We hope that this webinar has been helpful for you all and for your organizations. And again, if you have any further questions or just want more information, please feel free to contact us or contact Angela. Thank you all so much, and I hope you guys have a great rest of the day and stay warm this weekend with the incoming
Be
weather.
safe. Thank you. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you all. Bye.